Have you ever poured years of your life into something only for it to end up being a total letdown? Yeah, Kenichi knows that pain. He'd just sunk 3 full years into a video game that, if we're being honest, was trash. He cleared the final mission, dropped back into his chair, and let out this heavy, empty sigh. 3 years for nothing. The game never made him sweat, never pushed him to the edge, never once felt like it could beat him. What he wanted was the complete opposite. A challenge so brutal, so twisted, that it would take him at least a decade to master. Not something you eventually win just by grinding and being patient, but something that would crush him again and again until he finally conquered it. So he immediately started hunting for his next obsession, scrolling through titles, reading reviews, digging through forums, watching gameplay, and nothing hit. Everything looked the same, predictable, boring. Then his screen started acting wrong. The image warped, flickered like it was possessed, and a message popped up, something he'd never seen before. It offered him a game that sounded way too good to be real, a fantasy world full of magic and monsters, and the game never ends. Kenichi's eyes went wide, his heart started pounding. An infinite game? That was exactly what he'd been searching for his whole life. Without thinking, he clicked. The first thing that appeared was the difficulty selection. Easy, normal, hard, the usual boring lineup. But he kept scrolling, and at the very bottom, one extra option was glowing red. Hell mode. In all his years gaming, he'd never seen anything like it. And the second he focused on it, he felt this strange pull, like something grabbed him from the inside and started dragging him in. Before he could even scream, he got swallowed straight into his computer screen. Muffled sounds, a weird floating sensation. Then he opened his eyes and realized something terrifying. He was crying, not like a grown man, but like a newborn, because that's what he was now, a baby, reborn into a dirt-poor family of farmers living as servants. A rough-handed man lifted him gently, staring down with warm, proud eyes, his new father. Right there, he gave him a name, Alan. And here's the crazy part. Alan wasn't angry. He wasn't freaking out. If anything, he felt calmer than he had in years. In his old life, Kenichi was 35, broke, stuck in a dead-end job with no real friends and nothing that made life feel meaningful. Compared to that, starting over in a brand new world felt like winning the lottery. Time passed. Alan turned 1. He still couldn't speak, his body was a baby's, but his mind was fully intact. He could think clearly, understand everything around him, and study every detail of this new reality. He noticed the language here was Japanese, so that was the common tongue in this world. His family lived in a poor frontier village where farmers paid taxes to a feudal lord just to work the land. The place was so new and underdeveloped it didn't even have a real name yet. His father was Rhoden, around 20, working himself to the bone to keep them alive. His mother was Tertia, maybe 18 or 19, and the way they looked at each other, Alan had a feeling more siblings wouldn't be far behind. That night, lying in his tiny bed, Alan remembered something important. In this world, he was supposed to be a summoner, right? So he tried to open a status window, like any RPG. But instead of a clean menu, a massive book materialized out of nowhere and floated right above him. Alan panicked and screamed, which instantly brought his parents running. If they saw a floating book, they'd start asking questions he couldn't answer. So he made it vanish just before they burst in. They checked the room, saw nothing unusual, assumed he'd just made noise in his sleep, and quietly left. Once he was sure they were gone, Alan carefully summoned the book again. This floating tome was a grimoire, his stats and abilities written inside like a living system. And it confirmed it. He really was a summoner, just like the class he chose before getting dragged into this world. He could summon creatures to fight for him, but with one major limitation. Because he was so young, he could only summon insects and small beasts for now. Alan was still hyped, so he tried to summon something immediately. Nothing happened. Again, nothing. After enough failures to make him want to lose it, he forced himself to calm down and think.
The grimoire mentioned another skill, so he tried generate first, and it worked. A crafting card for an insect appeared floating in front of him. That's when it clicked. He had to create the creature's card first, and only then could he summon it. He braced himself to do it for real when his mother suddenly walked in. Alan instantly played dead asleep, and even after she left, he felt his body crash with exhaustion. His eyelids turned into weights. Staying awake was a losing fight. So he gave in, slept, and decided he'd try again tomorrow. The next morning, while his parents were busy, Alan pulled out the grimoire again and followed the full process correctly. This time, the summoning succeeded instantly. A giant grasshopper popped into existence and immediately jumped straight onto his face. Alan freaked out but recovered fast and tried to command it mentally. It ignored him completely, just bouncing around the room doing whatever it wanted. Confused, he checked the grimoire and found the answer. To form a bond, he had to name the summon. After a moment, he picked a name that felt right for a grasshopper, Denka. Then he noticed something else. Just summoning Denka had slightly boosted some of his own stats. But before he could celebrate, his mother walked in again without warning. She saw the grasshopper, panicked because she was terrified of insects, and smashed it in one strike. Just like that, Denka was gone forever. Alan could only stare, frozen, at what was left of his very first summon. Days passed. Alan kept experimenting. Eventually, he summoned a new creature, a tiny rat. He named it Mousy. And unfortunately, Mousy was just as dumb as Denka. Barely listened, mostly did whatever it wanted. Still, it had one useful skill called Scurry, letting it zip around the room like a lightning bolt. It wasn't obedient overall, but at least when Alan ordered it directly, it would use Scurry. Alan spent the rest of that day buried in the grimoire, rereading every page, trying to figure out exactly what he had to do to summon stronger monsters, ones that would actually follow commands. He tried theories, conditions, combinations, but no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't find a clear answer. By nightfall, he had nothing but frustration. That same afternoon, Rhoden finally came home after being gone all day. His clothes were soaked with fresh blood, and it was obvious he'd just survived a dangerous hunt.
Kept the narrative aligned with Hell Mode, Kenichi reborn in another world as Alan, while preserving your wording and names as much as possible. Rhoden proudly told Alan he'd managed to take down a massive boar. He described with real excitement how huge and terrifying the beast was, then asked Alan if he wanted to come see it with his own eyes. Alan lit up instantly. This would be the first real monster he'd ever see in this world since being reborn. Seeing how excited his son was, Rhoden didn't hesitate. He took him right away. It was Alan's first time leaving the house since he was born here, so everything felt new. Fresh air, open space, the whole world finally in front of him. As they walked, Rhoden pointed up at the sky, where a flock of birds known as the Bajiron flew in formation. Around this season, they traveled north together, basically announcing that autumn had officially arrived. Then, Rhoden told Alan something surprisingly heartfelt. He'd named him in honor of those birds, the Aberon. After about 10 minutes of walking toward the village, they reached the spot where the boar was being butchered. Several villagers were already there, working in groups to process the enormous monster. At first, Alan was pure hype as he stared at it close up, but as he looked more carefully and truly understood how big it was, his excitement slowly turned into real fear. Seeing a monster that huge and clearly powerful in person made something click in his mind. This world was genuinely dangerous. Alan realized that if he ever had to fight something like that in his current state, he wouldn't stand a chance. He'd be slaughtered in seconds. After a while, one of their neighbors, a strong man named Gerda, walked up to Rhoden with a grin and congratulated him warmly for taking the boar down. Then other villagers nearby started cheering and clapping too. Everyone in the village knew dropping a boar that size wasn't easy at all. It was a big deal. Rhoden formally introduced Alan to Gerda.
The moment Gerda saw how polite and well-behaved Alan was, especially at only 1 year old, he was basically speechless. It wasn't normal for a kid that small to carry himself with that kind of maturity. Putting that aside, Alan asked Gerda, genuinely curious, just how strong a boar like that really was. Gerda patiently explained that boars in this world were naturally C-rank monsters, and that it usually took around 20 people working in perfect coordination to bring down just one of them safely. Alan quietly stored that information away. Now he finally had a clear reference point for what strength looked like in this world, and what kind of danger he might be facing sooner than he wanted. About 10 months passed. Then Alan got news that actually got him fired up. He'd finally reached level 2 as a summoner. That level up meant he could now create creature cards of G rank, which was a major step forward. On top of that, he unlocked a brand new ability he'd never had before. He could fuse his summoned creatures. And the best part? His inventory space doubled. That meant twice the upgrades, twice the resources, and way more potential power as a summoner. That night after dinner, Alan was more excited than he'd been in a long time. New level, new fusion skill, bigger inventory. He went to his room ready to test fusion for the very first time. But the moment he tried, his excitement crashed. No matter what he did, he still couldn't use fusion on his cards, even with his MP completely full. He repeated the exact process described in the grimoire again and again, as carefully as possible, and nothing activated. It was maddening, but eventually he forced himself to accept the truth. He was too young. His body just wasn't strong enough yet to handle a skill like that. Time kept moving. By the time Alan turned 3, he'd made real, visible progress as a summoner. After countless tries, non-stop practice, and more failures than he could even count, he finally succeeded in using fusion on multiple cards. And through that complicated fusion process, he created something brand new, a bird card. When he summoned it, he named it Chappie, and Chappie came with a ridiculously useful special skill, voice imitation. It could perfectly mimic anything Alan said. The first time Alan heard Chappie copy his voice with exact precision, he immediately saw the possibilities. He pictured using it to confuse enemies in a fight, lure monsters into traps at the worst possible moment for them. As Alan stood there thinking about everything he'd learned, he felt genuinely satisfied. This world was deep, complex, and honestly, it felt like the absolute peak of gaming, far beyond anything he'd experienced back when he was Kenichi. Later that day, around 3 p.m., one of Alan's friends, a girl named Karina, came over for another playdate like she often did. As always, they started playing knights, swinging swords made from wooden sticks they'd found. Alan completely underestimated her. He figured beating a girl his age would be easy. He was wrong. Karina was way faster and way more agile than he ever expected. She moved with insane speed, dodged his hits like it was nothing, and countered before he could even react properly. Alan fought hard just to keep up, but he couldn't, and before he fully understood what was happening, he lost the fight. By the end of the day, Alan was exhausted and bruised all over thanks to Karina. His body ached and his pride took a hit. But instead of getting depressed about it, he made a quiet promise to himself. Next time, he wouldn't lose. He was going to get much stronger before their next battle. That same night, the family got huge news. Tercia made an announcement. She was pregnant again. The moment Alan heard that, he told his father he wanted to help with the potato harvest since his mother wouldn't be able to do as much field work while pregnant. Deep down, Alan knew he could handle heavy labor. He had an adult's mental endurance trapped in a 3-year-old body, but his parents didn't know that. They gently told him a child his age shouldn't be working in the fields. He should be playing and having fun like any normal kid. They encouraged him to keep spending time with Karina since they could see how happy he looked when they played knights together, even if Alan always lost. They also mentioned something they were really looking forward to, Alan's upcoming evaluation ceremony. Alan had no idea what that was, so Tercia explained patiently. When he turned 5, there would be a special divine ceremony to determine what specific talent he had. They truly hoped Alan would receive a strong talent, something that could finally free their miserable life as serfs and give them a real chance at something better. A few months later, during the freezing winter season, Alan made a mistake. He forgot to store Denka inside his grimoire. Because of that slip-up, his mother suddenly saw the giant insect in the room. She panicked, got terrified, lost her footing, and slipped hard, crashing to the floor. When Rhoden heard the noise, he rushed in to check on her, and through the pain, Tercia told him her water had broken. The baby was coming, right now. It was too early, but there was no stopping it. Karina happened to be nearby because she and Alan were in the middle of one of their usual playdates. Rhoden immediately told her to run and get her parents because they had real experience helping with emergency births. The night dragged on, tense and endless. Then morning finally came, and the kids woke up to the unassailable sound of a baby crying, loud and strong. They ran over, and sure enough, despite the scare, the baby had been delivered safely. Tercia, exhausted but smiling, asked Rhoden to name the child. Without overthinking it, Rhoden chose a name, Mesh. Tercia loved it instantly, but after a few seconds, she tilted her head and asked, was that name also taken from a monster like Alan's? Rhoden admitted it with an embarrassed smile. Yeah, it was. Tercia couldn't deny it, though. It still sounded good. She laughed weakly, and everyone in the room joined in, sharing that tired, relieved laughter. And while they all laughed together in that warm moment, Alan watched quietly from the corner, replaying everything he'd been through since arriving in this world. He still didn't truly understand why he was reincarnated in the first place, other than his desperate wish to play a hardcore game with terrible balance and impossible challenges.
He remembered exactly how miserable, empty, and pointless his old life as Kenichi had felt, and he finally accepted something he'd been avoiding. He was completely at peace leaving that life behind forever. In this new world, magical, violent, and unpredictable, he felt truly free for the first time. No pointless restrictions, no invisible ceiling, just endless possibilities. And more than anything else, he knew with absolute certainty that this new family was the best part of his second life, the most valuable thing he had. He didn't know exactly how he'd do it yet, or what path he'd have to take, but Alan made himself a quiet promise. From this moment on, he would protect this family with everything he had, no matter what. You know what it feels like when your entire future depends on one single ceremony? Alan was about to find out. Now that he'd turned 5, his boss, his dad, Rhoden, took him on a walk through a field packed with flowers, explaining the most important thing Alan had faced since being reborn. In this world, there was a special ceremony that basically told you whether you had value or not. Okay, it wasn't that cruel, but it was close. Every kid had to go through it at 5 years old, and if you were lucky, if they discovered you had talent, then boom, you and your whole family could climb out of the misery of being serfs. But Rhoden didn't sell him a fairy tale. He made it clear the competition was brutal because their area was packed with people, everyone chasing the same golden ticket. While they walked, they ran into Karina and her father Gerda. The 4 of them decided to travel together to a nearby commoner village. And when they finally arrived, Alan froze for a second. The people there were still considered commoners, basically lower class by this world's standards, but compared to his family, they looked rich. Clean clothes, well-groomed hair, everything tidy and cared for. It hit Alan like a punch. His family wasn't just poor, they were desperately poor. Not long after, the ceremony was ready to begin.
The priests, dressed with full pomp and ceremony, slowly opened the building's massive doors. The first thing they did was order everyone to show respect to Elmia, the god of creation in this world. After the religious formalities, one priest gave a motivational speech that the kingdom's true heroes didn't only come from rich, powerful families, they could also rise from ordinary serfs like them. Alan listened and something snapped into place. Back in his previous life, when he read the original game's epilogue, it mentioned that legendary classes like Hero or Sword Lord had to start from the bottom of society. He thought it was just some random game mechanic. Now he understood it wasn't a mechanic, it was a law of this world. That's why everyone had to participate in this ceremony, noble or serf, it didn't matter. Once the formal explanation ended, the commoners filed in calmly, one by one. Inside, Alan spotted a huge statue standing at the center of the room. He assumed it was a representation of Elmia. The ceremony officially started, and the first to go up were the village chief and his son. The kid, named Palomas, walked to a giant crystal and placed his hand on it. It lit up instantly. A voice announced that he had talent. His father practically exploded with relief, rushing in and hugging him like his life depended on it. It was obvious he'd been terrified his son would come out with nothing and be labeled useless in front of everyone. Alan watched it all fascinated. And then, without warning, his grimoire popped into existence, floating in front of him. No one else noticed. The book started writing numbers on its own, filling pages like it was updating in real time. And Alan instantly understood what that meant. People's attributes were being revealed as clear numerical values now, instead of being hidden. Even better, only he could see the grimoire. Nobody had any idea it was there, which meant he could analyze everyone freely without raising a single suspicion. The ceremony continued. Some kids celebrated with their parents after receiving decent talents, but not everyone got that happy ending. Several children received nothing at all, and the disappointment on their faces said everything. Their families would stay serfs for generations. Next up was a boy named Dagora. He placed his hand on the crystal. It flared brightly. The priest announced his talent, Axe User. Dagora jumped like he'd won the lottery and sprinted straight into his father's arms. One by one, kid after kid stepped forward and got their verdict. Eventually, only 2 children remained, Alan and Karina, both standing there beside their fathers, feeling the pressure squeeze tighter with every second. Karina, buzzing with nervous excitement, ran up to the crystal first. The exact moment her fingers touched it, light detonated out of the crystal, blinding and violent, brighter than anyone had seen all day. When it came time to announce her talent, even the priests, men who'd seen thousands of ceremonies, stood there with their mouths open. Karina's stats were nearly maxed out across the board, and then the result dropped like a bomb. She had the talent of Sword Lord, one of the rarest, most powerful classes in existence. Gerda whipped like he might levitate from happiness, but Karina herself? She didn't look as thrilled as you'd expect. She actually pouted, because all she wanted was to be a normal swordswoman, not some complicated legendary class with a destiny attached to. Alan wasn't surprised at all. He'd always known there was something different about her, especially after all the times she'd completely destroyed him during their little knights games. But now it was his turn, and Alan was fired up. He was ready for everyone to find out the truth. He was a summoner. He walked up to the crystal with absolute confidence and placed his hand on the cold surface. And then, a blinding burst of light erupted with so much force it launched him backward. Alan panicked and rushed to the priests, asking if his son had awakened some unique talent, something special. The answer hit like ice water. The priest announced cold and simple. Alan had no talent. And weirdly, Rhoden didn't look angry, not even a little. He calmly held Alan by the shoulders and said it was time to go home. They walked back in silence. At home, Terciet and Little Mash welcomed them warmly, like nothing had changed. That night, Rhoden sat down with Alan for a father and son talk. He told him not to feel bad about having no talent, that it didn't change anything about how much they loved him. Alan couldn't stop the disappointment from creeping in, but at the same time, he felt something even stronger: gratitude, because he had a family that loved him unconditionally. Later, lying in bed with the grimoire open in front of him, Alan checked his stats again. Every single attribute was ranked E, but at least the ceremony revealed something crucial, something that changed everything. He was the only person in this entire world playing on Hell mode, and once Alan realized that, the puzzle pieces started sliding into place. The ranking system probably reflected how much a person could grow when leveling up, so his skills were rank E because he chose Hell mode, meaning his growth was crushed down to a tiny fraction of normal. Most people would quit the moment they saw a difficulty that brutal, but Alan wasn't most people. He was on a personal mission to prove he could conquer any hardcore game placed in front of him, no matter how impossible it looked. The next day, Alan and his family headed to Karina's house to celebrate her Swordlord talent. On the way, Alan couldn't help noticing something. Rhoden seemed irritated, like he was carrying a problem he didn't want to say out loud. That mood followed him the entire walk. And once the celebrating started, food, drinks, everyone talking at once, Rhoden and Gerda suddenly began arguing over something stupid. Alan watched, confused, wondering if his dad was jealous that Karina had become a sword lord, but he quickly dismissed it. He knew Rhoden. He wasn't that kind of man. The argument kept escalating, louder, sharper, until finally Gerda dropped a bomb that made the entire room go silent. He revealed that Rhoden once said he wanted to cut all ties from his family. Everyone froze. Rhoden admitted it was true, but he explained why. Karina's talent was 1 in a million, so rare she could even become a noble one day. And because of that, Rhoden believed they shouldn't risk the girl's future by staying closely associated with serfs like them. Even after that explanation, the two men kept going at each other like they were enemies, until finally their wives had enough, stepping in and smacking some common sense into both of them, ending the fight the only way it was ever going to end.
Matilda and Tercia explained what was really going on. The four of them had been childhood friends, grew up in the same village, running around together since they were little kids. And apparently, Gerda and Rhoden had always been hard-headed, always looking for an excuse to clash. Becoming fathers mellowed them out a bit, but old habits don't die easy. Just remembering those old stories eased the tension, and the rest of the night turned into laughs, drinks, and that back-in-the-day vibe. The next morning, rumors about Karina's talent spread through the region like wildfire. It didn't take long before the Night Order started planning a special visit to see her with their own eyes. Soon after, they arrived at the village, riding in on impressive horses like they owned the world. The moment they showed up, Karina and her dad rushed to greet the commander properly. While they talked, Alan watched from a distance, and this heavy sadness crept into his chest. Because this probably meant Karina would have to leave the village someday to become a real knight. He understood that was her path, but he still admitted it to himself. When that day came, he was going to miss her like crazy. After the commander spoke with Gerda for a bit, he suddenly reached a brutal conclusion. He declared they were probably lying about Karina's talent. And then he dropped the order. She had to prove it in a duel against the vice captain. If she failed to demonstrate her power, she'd be executed on the spot. Because in this world, lying about your talent was punishable by death. Gerda refused immediately. He couldn't understand why a grown, experienced vice captain would ever need to fight a 5-year-old girl. Alan felt the exact same way, but he also knew arguing wouldn't change anything. Karina glanced at the sword she'd be using, and her eyes sparkled. It was shiny, beautiful, and she looked genuinely excited. And for that reason alone, she accepted the duel without hesitation, telling her dad not to worry. Gerda just stood there stunned by his daughter's reaction. With that, the duel between Karina and Vice Captain Lybrand officially began. At first, they looked evenly matched, trading strikes, neither clearly dominating. Then, Lybrand started using the overwhelming strength of an adult. He powered through, completely took control, and slammed her into a wall. Gerda panicked and tried to rush in to protect her daughter, but the other knights grabbed him and held him back by force. By that point, the commander was already convinced it was over and that the whole thing had been a lie. But then, to everyone's shock, Karina stood up again. A faint blue aura shimmered around her,
and in the next instant, she charged Lybrand with impossible speed, then unleashed a brutal storm of sword slashes 10 times faster and heavier than anything she'd shown before. Lybrand fought like hell to keep up. It was useless. In seconds, his sword was sliced clean in half like it was made of butter. The commander immediately shouted to stop the duel before something even worse happened. The vice captain was left in total shock, unable to process how his 24-year-old self with years of training had been beaten by a 5-year-old who had just awakened her power. The villagers erupted in cheers, fully convinced now she really was the legendary Sword Lord. Gerda looked so overwhelmed with pride he almost started crying right there, watching his daughter beat impossible odds. Not long after, the commander approached Gerda with a serious expression and said there was no longer any doubt about Karina's talent. He wanted to discuss her future privately. Gerda was still furious that they'd forced her daughter into a test that could have gotten her killed, but he agreed because he understood how important this was. They headed to the village chief's residence where they held the discussion over a formal dinner. The commander introduced himself as Xenof. He explained he'd been sent directly by the local lord to confirm whether a sword lord had really appeared in this frontier village. After witnessing the duel himself, he had his answer. Then, Xenof revealed another decision from the lord, one that would change everything. Originally, the village was supposed to be named after the chief, like usual, but the discovery of a sword lord changed the plan completely. To honor Karina and her legendary talent, the village would now be officially named Karina Village. After announcing that, Xenof sincerely apologized to Gerda for putting her through such a brutal, dangerous trial. Gerda wasn't the type to hold a grudge forever, so he accepted the apology and let it go. Then Xenof told him to keep raising Karina the same way he'd always done, with love and care. And once she turned 12, she'd be sent to the Royal Academy to study and fully master her talent under the kingdom's best teachers. Hearing Royal Academy got Alan fired up, his imagination instantly painting a place packed with people carrying legendary talents like Karina's. But as the conversation continued, Alan started wondering something else. Why was Dagora, the kid who got the axe user talent, also present at this private meeting? Xenof recognized Dagora and addressed him directly, telling him to train as hard as possible and earn admission to the academy one day through his own merit. With that handled, Xenof turned his attention to Alan and noticed something unusual. He found it strange that Alan had dark hair and dark eyes, which was rare in a world where most people had lighter colors. When Xenof learned that Alan was Rhoden's son, the famous boar hunter, he immediately stood and paid his respects. He explained that Rhoden was a legendary figure across the region, the man who handled the most dangerous parts of the hunts. To common people, Rhoden was a true hero. Hearing that made Alan feel ridiculously proud, and deep down, something clicked. His dad really was a hero, even without any special talent. Later that night, after everything wrapped up, Gerda and Rhoden said goodbye like real friends. Rhoden said he truly believed Karina could become a genuine heroine someday, but he was even more impressed that she'd been recognized by the Lord himself. Then he rested a hand on Alan's shoulder and told him to keep working hard and never give up, because he was destined for big things since he was Rhoden's son after all. Right then, Alan pulled out a few fruits he'd secretly snagged from the gathering, and Rhoden did the exact same thing. They both froze, then started laughing together like partners in crime under the moonlight. It was the kind of father-son moment Alan never had in his old life. 2 years of grinding finally paid off. Alan was bursting with excitement because his summoner ability had leveled up. When he opened his grimoire, he saw he now had an upgraded skill available, and his mind immediately started racing with possibilities. If he kept going like this, maybe one day he'd summon something truly insane, like a dragon. Thinking about all the effort it took to get here, Alan realized something important. Every second of waiting, every drop of sweat, it had been worth it. That same night, his parents made another announcement that filled the house with joy. Matilda was pregnant again. Everyone assumed this time it would be a girl, and the whole family started throwing out name ideas one after another. Then, Alan's grimoire appeared, floating in front of him where nobody else could see it. As he read it, he noticed the name of the god of creation, Elmia, written right there. Without thinking about the consequences, he casually suggested they named the baby that. His parents whipped their heads toward him in horror and instantly told him to shut his mouth, warning him that he must never ever speak their name of their god in vain like that. Alan realized immediately he'd messed up bad, so he tried to change the subject as fast as possible. To distract them, he quickly pointed out that his dad's scar looked like it was healing really well. Rhoden took the opening and explained he got that scar during a trial of the gods while hunting boars. Alan had no clue what that meant, so Rhoden explained it calmly. He said it was a special moment that sometimes happened mid-hunt, when a sudden surge of energy hit them, wiping away injuries and exhaustion, making them feel refreshed and stronger than before. The second Alan heard that description, everything clicked. That's how people in this world described what he knew as leveling up. Suddenly, it all made way more sense. Even though Alan's summoning improved, he understood something crucial. He'd still be stuck at level 1 unless he actually defeated real monsters. Upgrading a skill wasn't enough to level up for real. If he truly wanted to get stronger, he needed real combat experience, not just training in his room. So Alan made a decision. He needed to take hunting seriously. He asked his dad directly if he could accompany him on a hunt to gain real experience and maybe level up properly. But Rhoden shut it down immediately. He made it crystal clear. Hunting wasn't a game and it wasn't training. It came with real danger and real consequences. And mistakes out there could literally cost people their lives.
Hearing that, Alan understood the road to getting stronger wouldn't be easy, but that didn't mean he was willing to quit. Later that night, right before bed, Alan pulled out his grimoire and saw something he never expected. A direct message from Elmia himself, the god of creation. The message explained why his stats showed up as rank E during the appraisal ceremony. It was because he was playing on Hell mode. But the best part? The message also showed his real, unrestricted stats. Alan felt a wave of relief. He was genuinely happy when he saw the truth. His real stats were on the exact same level as Karina's. That single detail lit a fire in his chest. His future wasn't doomed, not even close. Curious and ready to test things, Alan decided to try his upgraded skill on Denka. Just like he suspected, the skill boosted everything Denka already had. When he summons Denka, it didn't look much bigger, but Alan could tell instantly it had been enhanced. It felt stronger. And then, of course, Tercia walked in, saw the giant insect, screamed, and out of pure instinct crushed it under her foot. Alan didn't let that stop him. He spent the rest of the night summoning, enhancing, testing, again and again until his eyes burned. By morning, he'd reached a huge realization. The enhancements he applied to a card didn't disappear afterward. That meant as long as he had enough MP to spare, he should enhance every single card in his inventory over time, make them all as strong as possible. Not long after, Rhoden got ready to head out for a hunt. Everyone said goodbye and wished him luck as he stepped out the door. Later, while Alan handled chores around the house, he tried to do more fusions and got frustrated fast. No matter how many combinations he tested, nothing new worked. There was only one fusion he hadn't tried yet, a bird and an insect. So he did it. At first, he smiled at the result. Then his smile vanished. The new card he created was an apple. Just a plain, stupid apple. A freaking apple. Alan felt crushed. He thought the fusion had failed in the weirdest way possible. But he forced himself to check the card's enhancements anyway. And the second he read them, his grin came back, bigger than ever. He'd finally found it, a creature with an MP enhancement. That was a massive breakthrough. It meant he could do way more actions and way more summons in a single day. Before this, he honestly believed it would take him decades to level up at a decent pace. Now, with an MP boost like this, decades could turn into a couple of years. Excited, he materialized the card, and the strange apple-shaped creature formed in front of him. Alan petted it like it was a real pet and decided it deserved a proper name. After a moment, he smiled. Oppo. After playing with Oppo for a bit, the creature finally showed its special ability. It sank into the ground like it was melting, then sprouted into a tall stalk that released a sweet, calming scent, like essential oil. Alan was too busy breathing it in to notice his mom walking up.
He panicked, tried to dismiss the stalk, but it wouldn't disappear no matter what he did. Tercia came closer and noticed the weird stalk, but she didn't think much of it because the smell was so nice it instantly put her in a better mood. Later that day, Karina showed up for their regular training session. And during sparring, Karina absolutely destroyed Alan over and over without even breaking a sweat. But when training ended, she admitted something interesting. Alan had gotten a little tougher than before. That surprised him, so he immediately checked his grimoire. Sure enough, his endurance and even his attack-related stats had improved. Alan started wondering if Oppo's sweet scent had given him temporary buffs. He had no real way to test it properly, so for now he shoved the thought aside. As the days passed, Alan noticed something else. Thanks to Oppo, he had more MP to work with. After a couple simple tests, he finally understood how Oppo's skill, Aroma, actually worked. It reduced MP recovery time from 6 hours down to 5. That meant more activity and more summons per day, which was a huge advantage for his growth as a summoner. Even so, Alan couldn't shake this restless feeling, like there was never enough time to do everything he needed to do. Then, late one night, Alan and his mom started to worry. Rhoden wasn't home, and it was way later than it should have been. Minute by minute, worry turned into real fear. And then they heard it. Loud footsteps, shouting outside. They ran out and saw several adventurers carrying Rhoden on an improvised stretcher. He was badly hurt, covered in blood, barely conscious. When they brought him inside, Gerda, voice shaking, explained what happened. Rhoden had taken a boar tusk straight to the stomach. That was why he was in such horrific condition. They'd only kept him alive using a special healing herb. Gerda admitted with tears in his eyes that without that magic herb, Rhoden would already be dead. But even with it, the wound wasn't fully healed. It was still big, still dangerous, and it could get infected. Alan, trembling, asked Gerda how something like this could even happen. Gerda explained it wasn't one person's fault. Normally, commoners didn't even participate in boar hunts. They were too dangerous for people without experience. But this year was different. A lot of commoners volunteered to join the hunt because they heard legendary stories about Rhoden, the hero, and they naively believed that as long as Rhoden was there, they'd be safe no matter what. Gerda admitted that neither he nor Rhoden felt good about bringing commoners into a hunt that dangerous, but they couldn't refuse a direct order from the village chief. So the commoners joined, and the risk skyrocketed. Instead of sticking to the plan they'd been taught, they panicked, they ran. The formation broke into chaos. One of the commoners was about to be impaled by the boar's tusk, and Rhoden stepped in. He saved them, and took the hit himself. Hours later, deep into the night, Rhoden finally woke up. Everyone felt relief so strong it almost hurt. He was alive. But Alan couldn't stop blaming himself. He realized he'd been almost useless during the crisis, when he could have helped so much more if he'd been stronger. He'd been selfishly locked in on leveling up and boosting his own abilities, and because of that, he hadn't been paying enough attention to what was happening around him, or to the people who actually needed him. He remembered the most important thing he'd let slip. He had a family to protect. Quietly, Alan made it his personal mission to become strong enough to truly protect them, no matter what it took. Not long after, Gerda arrived and dropped off Rhoden's share of boar meat for participating in the hunt. Then Gerda looked Rhoden in the eye and told him sincerely not to worry about anything through the winter. His only job was to recover. That's when Alan spoke up too, with real determination. He told his dad to rest and take it easy without stressing, because from now on, Alan would handle everything. He would provide for the family while Rhoden healed. The next day, he backed it up. He worked hard, hauling water from the communal well, carrying heavy buckets all the way back to fill our reserves. After that, Gerda patiently showed Alan how to harvest crops the right way. At first, Gerda honestly thought the work would be too much for a kid Alan's age.
But to his complete shock, Alan harvested stalk after stalk without slowing down at all. That's when Gerda realized Alan was way stronger physically than he ever would have guessed. Not long after, the village chief visited their home, along with the commoner who directly caused Rhoden's injury by breaking formation. The commoner immediately apologized over and over, crying as he begged for forgiveness, clearly expecting Rhoden to be furious or to hold a grudge forever.
Instead, to everyone's surprise, Rhoden calmly told the man to just be more careful next time. No anger, no shouting. Seeing that, Alan felt a deep admiration for his father. It hit him how genuinely noble and kind Rhoden's heart really was. Later that day, Alan headed back to the flower field and cleared out a big section of it so he could trap traps and try to catch meat for the family. He caught a couple small frogs and used them as part of the bait to get his plan moving. After setting everything up carefully, Alan hid in the bushes and waited, patiently, for something to bite. He waited and waited. Nothing happened. Alan started thinking the whole plan had failed and he just wasted the entire day, when suddenly a gigantic bird swooped down from the sky and landed right in the cleared area. Alan leaned in to identify it and his stomach dropped. This wasn't a normal bird. It was an alba heron, a dangerous monster. Alan had only meant to learn small animals and ordinary birds for food. He never in a million years expected something like this to show up. And right there, staring at a threat he had no business facing, Alan made a risky decision. He thought it might actually be worth testing his new ability against the alba heron. Alan charged in and swung his sword, and the alba heron swatted him aside like he was nothing. Hard. So Alan immediately summoned several wolves from his cards, and they rushed in, snapping and attacking from every angle. For one brief moment, Alan honestly thought he might have a real chance. Then everything went bad. Fast. The alba heron started eating his summoned wolves one after another like they were snacks. Out of options, Alan forced himself up and attacked again with his sword, desperate. This time he got smashed even harder, slamming into the ground. The alba heron walked over slowly and stood right on top of him, looming like it was about to eat him alive. Alan raised his sword with shaking arms, his whole body trembling, his mind screaming the one fear he couldn't ignore. Was this really it? Was he going to die without ever protecting his family? And then, when everything felt hopeless, his brain finally snapped into survival mode. With the alba heron literally above him, seconds away from tearing him apart, Alan got one last idea. He summoned 2 leeches. They latched onto the monster instantly and started draining it like crazy. It weakened the beast just enough to buy Alan a breath and a clear thought. Yeah, he was weaker now. He'd lost summons. He'd lost boosts. He didn't care. He only needed one opening. Alan summoned his wolves again and gave the command. The wolves and the leeches attack at the same time, from every angle. As his creatures swarmed, Alan lunged with everything he had and drove a decisive sword strike straight into the alba heron's head. The hit was strong enough. The monster dropped, and it stayed down. His grimoire flashed with a notification. He had defeated an alba heron. He gained 100 XP. Alan got so hyped he actually celebrated, jumping around like he couldn't believe what he just pulled off. After he calmed down, he dragged the alba heron all the way back home. His family was stunned. They'd always seen Alan as a weak little kid, yet somehow he'd taken down a ranked monster completely on his own. Gerda offered to help him bleed the monster out and prepare it properly. Once they had it secured, Gerda gave Alan a full lesson on how to butcher it, where to cut, how to separate the meat, and which parts were safe to eat. Then Gerda added something important. Every monster has magic stones inside it, and any stone from a monster above rank D falls under the kingdom's tax laws. Still, Gerda didn't see it as a huge problem because a stone like that would be basically useless to poor serfs like them anyway. What mattered more was this. Gerda believed they could negotiate a better cut of the meat with the village chief if they explained that Alan was the one hunting because Rhoden was injured and couldn't do it himself. So they went to the chief's office and played it exactly like that, using Rhoden's injury as leverage. At first, the chief insisted they should only receive the smallest portion possible, but they kept pushing, reminding him how badly Rhoden was hurt and how a child like Alan had to risk his life. Eventually, the chief caved. He agreed to give them a much larger share. He told them they could keep all the meat while he would only take the wings and the magic stones. But Alan pushed even further. He asked if they'd be allowed to make this kind of deal in the future, too. The chief thought about it for a long time, then finally accepted. 3 days later, Alan used the exact same tactic again, this time facing 2 alba herons. Beating one before had given him a massive confidence boost, and now he took down both of them with his leeches, his wolves, and his wooden sword in record time. Alan had been hunting once every 3 days since the first win, but this time was different. For the first time, he didn't lose a single summon during the battle. He was thrilled. His grimoire lit up again. 2 alba herons defeated, 200 XP gained. But the real moment, the one that mattered, came right after. Level up. Alan had officially reached level 2. He got insanely excited and immediately checked his stats. He saw that leveling up fully restored his HP and MP, which was huge. But he also noticed something weird. His stat increase was only about 60% of what it should have been. He didn't overthink it. He figured maybe you don't get the full benefits the moment you hit the level. Either way, he was still happy because his hard work was finally paying off. And the more he thought about it, the more he started believing this might be what Rhoden meant by a trial of the gods. In his head, it felt incredible, but it also meant something else. Sooner or later, he'd have to tell his family the truth. Later that day, Alan came home with his prey, and Rhoden was completely shocked that Alan had managed to hunt 2 alba herons in a single day. After that, Alan met up with Karina for their usual sword training. That night, Alan decided it was finally time to tell his parents the truth about how he'd been able to defeat monsters like that so easily. But he knew he couldn't tell them the real story, getting sucked into some random game he found online, because they'd think he'd lost his mind. So Alan came up with a better explanation, one that sounded believable. He told them that when he was only 1 year old, he had heard an oracle directly from Elmia, the god of creation. He explained that an oracle basically meant he was smarter and physically stronger than the average person, and not only that, it meant he would face divine trials, things beyond what even 100 men could normally accomplish together. The moment Rhoden heard that, he seemed to understand immediately. He could tell Alan had already gone through a trial. Rhoden had noticed earlier that morning that a cut on Alan's face was gone, completely healed, so this was the only explanation that made sense. But Tercia still couldn't understand how any of this was possible, especially because last year's appraisal ceremony clearly said Alan had no talent. That's when Alan added one more lie, carefully. He told them he had received another oracle from Lord Elmia a few months ago. He explained that the reason his attributes were graded so low during the ceremony was because they took into account the extremely slow progression of his divine trials. And the reason he was judged talentless was because his talent was too new and unique for the crystal to properly recognize at the time. Rhoden was stunned by that, because if it was true, then Alan really did have a talent after all. When Rhoden asked, excited, what that talent was exactly, Alan said he wasn't completely sure yet because Elmia hadn't revealed all the details. Alan felt awful for lying to his father, but he believed he had no choice. He was scared of how people might react if they found out he could summon and control monsters, and he knew he could never say a word about being reincarnated. In the end, Rhoden simply pulled Alan into a tight hug and praised him for being so brave and strong, especially for someone so young.
Rhoden asked Alan what he planned to do next, and Alan answered honestly. For now, all he wanted was to prove he was worthy by passing every divine trial that came his way. Rhoden looked incredibly proud hearing something that mature come out of a kid's mouth, but he also told Alan not to hesitate for even a second to ask for help if he ever needed it. Alan thanked both of his parents sincerely for being so understanding and for supporting him unconditionally. After that, Rhoden told Alan it would be best to keep all of this a secret for now. It could turn ugly fast if people started mistaking him for a fake prophet or a scam artist. But Rhoden said there'd be one exception, Gerda. Gerda was always bragging about how amazing Karina was as a sword lord, so Rhoden grinned and said now he finally had the chance to brag about his own son too, and put Gerda in his place. Once winter hit in full force, Alan took one of the Albarian carcasses they had stored and began cutting it up carefully. Then he headed to town with Gerda to trade the meat for supplies they needed.
Gerda had already heard the rumor that Alan had been blessed and tested by Lord Elmia, and honestly, he wasn't surprised at all. He'd always believed there was something special about that kid. As they traveled, the two kept talking, and Alan brought up the difference between commoners and serfs. Gerda explained it patiently. Most of it came down to social status and taxes. Serfs were under a much harsher tax system, 3 gold coins per adult and 1 gold coin per child, every single year, no exceptions. Hearing that, Alan asked what it would take for a serf to become a commoner. Gerda said they'd have to pay a one-time tribute of 10 gold coins per person in the family. He also mentioned rumors that the barons sometimes rewarded people with commoner status for special service, but he made it clear those were unconfirmed rumors. Alan heard the numbers and did the math instantly. With another baby on the way, they'd soon be a family of 5, which meant they'd need 50 gold coins total to buy their way into commoner status. Alan spent the rest of the day with Gerda, watching, learning, and figuring out the whole trade system actually worked. By the end of the day, he was walking home with a heavy bundle of firewood on his back, realizing he finally understood the basics of barter and commerce. And he spotted something even more useful. Next time he came to town, he could do real market research, learn the prices and values properly. The next time Alan went to trade, he did it completely on his own. While he was there, he carefully documented everything in his grimoire, the market value and barter value of each item, so he could use that information strategically later. After that, Alan stepped into an herb shop and asked the merchant if there was any medicine or potion that could restore MP. The merchant immediately said no. Anything like that was far too rare and expensive for a small shop to keep in stock. Still, Alan studied the shelves. There were so many herbs and medicines that recording them one by one would have been painfully slow. So he focused on his grimoire hard, and just by thinking about it intensely, he made the grimoire automatically sketch and record all the herbs without touching anything. Then Alan asked if the merchant currently had Mueller flowers in stock. The merchant instantly got irritated the moment he heard that name. He explained what happened. Some time ago, Gerda stormed into the shop like a madman, demanding a Mueller flower immediately. He claimed it was for a friend who was gravely ill, but he didn't even pay the full price. He promised he'd pay the rest later. To this day, the merchant still hadn't gotten the full payment. And even worse, that was the last Mueller flower the shop had. That part was what really made the merchant mad. Hearing that story made everything click for Alan. Gerda had been desperate to buy the exact herb that ended up saving Rhoden's life after the boar attack. If the merchant had refused to sell it without full payment, Alan probably wouldn't have a father right now. So he showed his appreciation in the only way he could. He gave the merchant a solid amount of Albaran meat and thanked him sincerely for his kindness before leaving the shop. On his way back, Alan was checking out weapons in a city shop when he ran into 2 familiar faces. Dagora, the kid who got the axe talent, and Palamas, the chief's son. Alan already knew Dagora was trouble with legs, so he tried to mind his own business and leave quietly. Dagora didn't let him. He smacked Alan on the head for no reason and demanded Alan become his lackey and follow him everywhere. Alan calmly pulled out his wooden sword and pointed it right at Dagora. Dagora looked shocked, then started whining that it was unfair because he didn't have a weapon on him. Alan told him, still calm, that he was completely willing to fight fair, so Dagora should go grab whatever weapon he wanted and Alan would wait right there. Dagora came back with a sword and charged at him in a rage. It didn't matter. Alan dodged and blocked every swing easily. Dagora hit hard, which made sense for an axe user with strength stats, but his power still wasn't even close to Karina's. Alan decided to waste no time. With one clean move, he knocked the sword out of Dagora's hand and ended the fight. Then he just acknowledged the win with zero emotion and walked away like it was nothing. Dagora was left even more furious and humiliated. Later that night, Alan got home and saw Rhoden carefully removing his bandages. That was a good sign. He was finally back in shape and ready to hunt normally again. Tertia warned him not to overdo it or risk pulling something or reopening the wound. The next day at Karina's house, Dagora showed up again, demanding a rematch because his ego couldn't accept reality. He got destroyed, again and again. But his pride wouldn't let him stop, so he kept asking for more rematches like punishment. Meanwhile, Alan's little brother had started basic sword training with Karina too, which made Alan excited to see how Mash would do in his own appraisal ceremony in 2 years. After some more time passed, the new baby was born, and everyone decided to name her Mila. The family felt complete. Later, Rhoden came home from a hunt with Gerda, both wearing serious expressions. They announced the whole family was being summoned by the village chief urgently. Apparently, the chief wanted to raise the number of boars they delivered to the Baron each year from 10 to 15. And to make that possible, he wanted to allow inexperienced commoners to join the dangerous boar hunt again this year. Tertia thought the request was insane, especially since Rhoden nearly died last time because the commoners broke formation. Rhoden admitted he wanted to refuse, but it wasn't a request. It was a direct order from the Baron, one they couldn't reject. If they didn't deliver 15 boars by this winter, the Empire would bring in more serfs from elsewhere to replace them. Alan immediately understood what that meant. More serfs meant less land for everyone, and that meant people who couldn't hunt would be at real risk of losing their plots and starving. Then Gerda added something even worse. The Baron wanted 20 full boars by the end of next year. Rhoden did the math in his head. The only way to hit that impossible demand was to hunt far more often than usual, way more than once every 10 days. That's when Alan spoke up confidently and said they should simply follow the Baron's order without protesting. Gerda snapped at him to stop interrupting while adults were talking, but Rhoden raised a hand, stopped him, and allowed Alan to continue. Alan laid it out clearly. Refusing a direct order from the Baron would bring consequences they couldn't survive.
So even if the commoners ended up being dead weight, they still needed a smart way to make that dead weight useful. Based on everything he'd learned from hardcore games in his past life, Alan knew exactly how this worked. You don't throw weak characters away, you squeeze value out of them, even when they look useless. That was his specialty. He told them to trust him and let him handle the situation strategically. He reminded them he'd been blessed with divine wisdom from Lord Elmia, and because of that blessing, he genuinely believed he had a plan that could work and keep everyone alive. The next day, Alan and Rhoden met the commoners who would be joining the hunt. The moment they saw Alan, they made the same face. Wait, a kid? A child was coming with them on something this dangerous? Rhoden quickly explained the plan. They would follow the proven hunting strategy like always, while Alan would simply accompany them to observe and learn. Alan assured them he wouldn't get in anyone's way. Then he bowed respectfully, thanking them for allowing it, though inside he was frustrated he couldn't participate fully. But he forced himself to focus on what mattered most, training the new hunters. He wanted them to gain the experience they needed to help the group bring in more boars in the future, because he didn't want anyone getting hurt the way his father had last year. One of the commoners nervously approached Rhoden and apologized sincerely for the injury he caused in last year's hunt. Rhoden didn't hold a grudge. He calmly told him it wasn't a big deal. Then he addressed everyone. Focus on the goal in front of them. Don't get stuck on mistakes from the past. After that, they entered the forest, and the hunt officially began. As the trees swallowed them up, Alan realized something that hit harder than he expected. After 7 long years as a serf, this was the first time he'd ever stepped beyond the village limits. In his mind, it was a small step, but a meaningful one towards freeing his family from this miserable life. And what excited him even more was a dream he'd held on to for years. Someday, he wanted to see the White Dragon Mountain with his own eyes. According to the stories, a mythical white dragon lived somewhere near those mountains. Alan had always dreamed of seeing it for real. Not long after, the hunt started in earnest. Everyone took their positions as a massive boar charged into view, furious and ready to kill. At the right moment, Zivo's team moved into place to lure the boar in a specific direction.
The tank team followed the plan perfectly, locking the boar down, keeping it from escaping or breaking loose to gore someone. Then the attack team stepped in and delivered the decisive finishing blow. Watching from a safe distance, Alan recognized it immediately. This was the exact hunting method his father and the experienced hunters had been using for over a decade. It was clean, disciplined, efficient. Honestly, it was impressive to see in action. When the boar finally dropped, the commoners felt this surge of pride. To them, a successful boar hunt was basically the famous trial of the gods, proof they'd grown stronger. Allen estimated that since the boar was a rank C monster, the commoners had probably earned a solid amount of XP from that kill. Curious, he discreetly checked his grimoire to see how much he'd gained, and he felt the disappointment instantly. 0 XP. After thinking for a second, it made perfect sense. He hadn't participated. He just watched like a spectator from a safe spot. Still, he felt satisfied seeing the commoners gain experience and confidence. After that hunt, Alan started talking with some of the villagers. The conversation drifted to monster meat, what they'd hunted before, what tasted best, what was worth the trouble. One man casually mentioned he'd be more than happy to help cut up any monster meat Alan managed to get. Alan didn't hesitate. He accepted. He led him to his secret stash, where he'd been storing multiple albaherns, and asked if he could help butcher them properly. Of course, the man wasn't doing it for free, so Alan offered a fair deal. For every albahern the man butchered, Alan would pay him 2 bundles of meat. The man was surprised at how generous that was and immediately agreed. His reason was simple and strategic. He was still grinding for the 50 gold coins needed to buy his family's freedom. Hiring a professional butcher in the city would cost even more. This way, he saved precious gold while still getting the meat prepared by someone with experience. Soon after, the hunting resumed with fresh energy, except this time they changed tactics completely. Instead of moving as one large group, they split into smaller teams. That way they could double the number of boars they hunted in a much shorter time. Even so, Alan still couldn't understand why the Baron was suddenly obsessed with collecting more boars than ever before. But the Baron was in charge, so they had no choice but to follow orders exactly. Then, without warning, one of the huge boars charged straight at them in a rage. Gerda reacted like a pro. He took the lead, slammed into the boar head-on and landed a powerful, lethal strike. Then he called out to the new hunters and told them to step in and finish it. They did, and once again they were proud of themselves for completing the hunt without needing to be carried. But for Alan, something was different this time. Last time, he got no stat increase. This time, he checked his status in the grimoire and felt pure excitement. His stats had gone up, and he'd even reached level 3. He understood immediately how it happened. The trick was simple, but effective. If one of his summons made physical contact with the monster before it died, then Alan was officially counted as a participant in the fight. So, at the last possible moment before the boar was killed, Alan summoned Denka and made the boar accidentally step on it, creating the contact he needed. He gained precious XP. But Denka got crushed and died for it. As Denka slowly drifted upward, breaking apart into particles of light, Alan apologized sincerely for using him like that. Even so, he couldn't deny it. The result was worth it. 3 months flew by, and Alan and Karina were invited to the chief's house to celebrate the new year in style. After spending some time there, they returned to their respective homes to celebrate properly, surrounded by delicious food. Gerda and his wife also came over to Alan's family to join, and the night turned warm and loud in the best kind of way. They ate together, laughed until their stomachs hurt, and soaked in that rare feeling of family. During the meal, Gerda casually asked Alan if the chief had said anything about them. Alan replied that the chief was extremely grateful for all their hard work and had made sure to express it clearly more than once. Rhoden expected that. He already knew they wouldn't have trouble hitting the brutal quota of 20 boars for the year. Then Alan mentioned something even more interesting. The chief was so pleased that he rewarded Alan with a bottle of high-quality liquor. Alan knew exactly how much Rhoden and Gerda loved alcohol and how wild they could get once the drinking started, so he decided to use that bottle strategically. He proposed a contest. If Alan won, he would be allowed properly to join the next hunt, hold a real spear, and fight alongside them as an equal, not as a spectator. But if Rhoden and Gerda won, they'd keep the liquor for themselves, no sharing. The instant Alan laid out the rules, the two adults realized too late that they'd walked straight into his trap. But the pull of that liquor was too strong. They accepted anyway. Then they asked Alan what kind of contest he had in mind. Alan answered calmly, an arm wrestling contest. Rhoden and Gerda were shocked Alan would even suggest something like that. To them, it was obvious they'd be far stronger than a kid. But they wanted that liquor badly, so they accepted without thinking it through. What they didn't know, Alan had been planning this for weeks.
He'd been saving several strength boost cards specifically for a strategic moment like this. That's why he was fully confident he could win, even against experienced adults like Gerda and Rhoden. Gerda stepped up first, smiling like this was going to be quick. In his head, it was an easy, effortless win. He didn't take Alan seriously at all. But the second the match started, Gerda's expression changed. Alan was way stronger than he ever imagined. Alan held his ground like a boulder, refusing to give even an inch. Gerda fought hard and pushed with everything he had. But in the end, Alan overwhelmed him and won in a way that left everyone stunned. Afterward, Alan thought it over and estimated Gerda's strength stat had to be somewhere around 150 to 200. Next was Rhoden, and Alan could tell instantly this wasn't the same tier. Alan's strength was getting close to an average adult, but Rhoden's raw power was on a completely different level. It dwarfed Alan's. Even so, the contest wasn't a total loss. Alan didn't get the exact result he wanted, but he learned something just as valuable, his current limits. Now he knew for sure Gerda was roughly in the D range for strength, while Rhoden was closer to the insane C range. After that, Rhoden got serious. He told Alan he wouldn't be allowed to hunt boars until the day Alan could beat him in pure strength. Instead of getting discouraged, Alan accepted the challenge with fire in his eyes. If anything, it motivated him even more. He'd get stronger and earn his rightful place in the hunt. Later that night, Alan noticed something else that made him grin. His summoner level had gone up again. Curious, he immediately opened his floating grimoire to see what changed. And when he flipped through the pages, he froze. A huge number of new abilities had appeared out of nowhere, but one ability above all the others grabbed him by the throat. He had gained the ability to freely view rank E cards whenever he wanted, no restrictions. Alan instantly understood how broken that was. With easy access to rank E cards, his overall power would rise fast, really fast. In his mind, he was already confident. With this advantage alone, he could challenge Rhoden again soon and maybe actually win next time. But as he kept examining the grimoire more carefully, he noticed something strange. A new page. It definitely hadn't been there before. He turned it and saw what looked like an empty hollow carved directly into the page. After experimenting with it, he realized what it was: dimensional storage. He could store physical objects inside the grimoire as long as they physically fit into the hollow. And the space stretched deeper than it looked from the outside, making it far more useful than it seemed at first glance. Alan was genuinely confused. Dimensional storage was a god-tier ability, something insanely rare, something only a handful of people in the world would ever have. So why would he get something that ridiculous right now? The timing felt too deliberate, like someone, something wanted him to receive it at this exact moment for a reason. The next day, Alan decided to test his new rank E summons. He took out a shining magic stone and activated his summoning with full concentration. The first summon he created was a rank E insect.
a breathtakingly colorful butterfly with wings that shimmered like they were made of magic. It was harmless, but strangely beautiful. Then Alan summoned a different rank E creature. This time, a saber-toothed tiger appeared. The moment it materialized, Alan instinctively stepped back. It was huge, muscular, razor fangs. But after watching it for a while, Alan realized something important. It wasn't a threat to him because he was his summoner. He slowly got used to its presence, then decided it deserved a proper name, Tama. He welcomed the tiger as a valuable addition to his growing team. After that, Alan tried to fuse two summons to create something new, and that's when he hit a frustrating limitation. Every fusion required a full magic stone to work. Now it was clear, if he wanted to keep getting stronger, he'd need a massive supply of magic stones. The only easy way he knew to get them was by hunting horned rabbits nearby. Later that night, he brought it up with his father, but Rhoden gave him bad news. Horned rabbits weren't going to show up around here anytime soon. A deep trench had been dug around the village a while back, basically blocking small monsters from wandering in, which meant Alan no longer had an easy way to farm stones like before. That night, he stayed awake thinking, hard, searching for alternatives. The next day, while Karina was once again training and absolutely destroying Dagora without mercy, Alan pulled Palomas aside and asked him if he knew anything useful about getting magic stones. And Palomas, being the chief's son, actually did. He explained that rank D magic stones were usually only found in the royal capital and they were extremely valuable. But rank E stones? They were basically worthless on the market. Sometimes you could literally find them just lying around. To prove it, Palomas casually picked one up from the ground nearby, handed it to Alan, and walked off like it meant nothing. That one small moment hit Alan like electricity. Hope came rushing back. If rank E stones were that common, then he could collect them himself, everywhere, without spending a coin. Over time, and with a lot of help from villagers he knew, Alan managed to gather a huge number of rank E stones. Using them strategically, he successfully created every rank E summon available to him in the grimoire. And right as he finished summoning the last one, a boar suddenly charged at him out of nowhere. Without hesitation, his summons reacted like trained soldiers, killing it in one fast, coordinated move. Alan celebrated for a second, then another boar appeared from a different angle. Again, no problem. One of his strongest summons moved automatically and erased the threat. And in that exact moment, Alan snapped his eyes open. He realized, stunned, that everything he had just seen was a hallucination, a vision of the future. He closed his eyes again and reflected on the last 7 years. There had been no summoner handbook, no mentor, no veteran instructor guiding him step by step. He'd been forced to figure out everything alone, through constant trial and error. And through that reflection and that vision, Alan finally understood something fundamental. Every summon type had a specific role. Insect types exist for debuffs and status effects. Beasts specialize in pure offense and damage. Birds were meant for reconnaissance, information gathering. Grass types handled healing and support. Stone types focused on defense and protection. And when you combined them the right way, together they let a single summoner cover every role of a standard adventurer party, all by himself. That's what made a summoner truly unstoppable. And now Alan finally understood why he'd been given dimensional storage at this exact time. It existed so he could store the countless magic stones he'd need on his path forward. With a massive army of diverse creatures under his command, Alan truly believed a master summoner built the right way could become stronger than even the legendary Demon Lord himself. Sometime after their hunting success, Alan, Rhoden, and Gerda were summoned to an early morning meeting with the chief. What they heard there changed everything. The Baron had taken a strong interest in their recent boar hunting results, and now he wanted to come witness it in person. Gerda looked visibly irritated. This was the same Baron who demanded an unreasonable number of boars in the first place. Now he wanted to show up and watch like it was some circus act for his entertainment. Rhoden didn't look angry, though. He looked confused. Why was Alan specifically being called to this meeting when he was just a kid? The chief explained it plainly. Because the Baron is coming personally, he wanted Alan to act as his official guide during the entire visit. Alan would be responsible for showing him the whole village, entertaining him, and explaining in detail how the hunts were being carried out so successfully. Gerda couldn't understand it. He asked, annoyed, why the chief couldn't just have his own son, Palomas, do it instead. The chief answered honestly. Palomas wasn't the right person for a responsibility that critical. He'd heard from multiple sources that it was Alan's smart ideas that directly led to their recent boar hunting success. That's why he believed Alan was perfect for the role. Then he asked Alan directly if he was willing to do it. Alan took a moment and thought strategically. He didn't care about pleasing the Baron just to look good. What he cared about was freeing his family from serfdom once and for all. If he kept hunting boars the traditional way, it could take 10 years to earn enough to raise their status to commoners. But then he remembered something crucial. Sometimes social status could be granted directly by the Baron as a special reward for exceptional service. With that tempting possibility in mind, Alan accepted the role. A few days after that meeting, Baron Granville finally arrived with his full entourage, accompanied by his daughter, Cecile. They were escorted by Zinov and several imposing knights on horseback. The chief welcomed him warmly with a deep bow. Soon after, everyone entered the main house for a formal dinner.
After a bit of light talk, Baron Granville finally brought up the serious topic, the boar hunts. He apologized sincerely for the sudden heavy demand for so many boars. He said he understood the goal was extremely difficult, but he had no choice because the order came directly from the king himself. The chief responded diplomatically that he understood and held no resentment. As everyone began eating, they commented on how delicious the meal was. Cecil, in particular, seemed impressed. She asked what kind of meat they were being served. Alan answered politely. It was fresh Alba heron meat, one he had hunted himself just the day before. Then he used the moment strategically. He formally introduced himself as the Baron's guide for the visit and said it was a great honor to serve him. Baron Granville was genuinely impressed by Alan's refined manners and naturally assumed Alan must be the chief's son. But the chief gently corrected him. Alan wasn't the chief's son. He was Rhoden's son, recognized as one of the best boar hunters in the entire village.